Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We have here with us today Kristin Alford, also from Australia. And Kristin Alford is a futurist, but it's also the director of the MOD at the University of South Australia. And the MOD is an immersive museum of discovery, a place to be inspired, to be and be inspired. So, Kristin, welcome to the Global Foresight Summit. We are very happy to have you here. You know that this year we are hosting the event together with the APF and the World Futures Review, the journal, and that the goal of the event is just creating a bigger ecosystem around foresight and futures and making people more aware of everything that is around this beautiful field that has so many different elements that can be connected together. So, Kristin, I leave this on your side, and I will be sharing your screen when you let me know, okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of what is a really exciting set of sessions, and I've really enjoyed what I've been able to see so far. So it's been a real pleasure. What I wanted to talk to today is a little bit about what we're doing at MOD, which is the Museum of Discovery at the University of South Australia. It's just celebrated its 3rd birthday, so we're still relatively new. But at the same time, we've also got a little bit of kind of evidence behind us of how we're applying some of our principles of foresight and research into engaging with young adults in what it seems for them to be times of great uncertainty. And I think one of the things that people said yesterday is like we're living in this, I think it might have been Jose Ramos, living in this great era where lots of things are being thrown up for reconsideration. So how do we manage that? And how as a young person do you manage that when the sorts of expectations that your parents had might not be the sorts of expectations for you, and how can we guide young people in a way that allows them to really prosper despite that uncertainty? So what I'm going to do today is go through a little bit about how I'm thinking about the application of foresight frameworks to the design of MOD, and then happy to take questions. I guess it's a little bit of a case study in terms of how we are thinking about museums at the heart of a community, and especially how we add that future level focus. So I'll just start my presentation, and then the screen can be shared. So you should be able to see MOD there. So yes, so as I said, MOD's 3 years old, and I've been working in this role since about 2016 to design it. And I guess one of the first questions that I was thinking about is when we're designing a museum for young adults aged 15 to 25, the first question that I can kind of hear echoing in my head from my master's studies is, what future are you designing? Why are you designing it? And for whom? So who are you designing it for? And then who are you excluding? So we're very deliberate that we are designing for young adults aged 15 to 25. We don't take ID at the door. We're happy to welcome everybody, but it is specifically designed for that group with the sorts of concerns and issues that they might have. And it's interesting because part of the concerns and issues that we have as a community for young people is that a lot of the careers of the future will require STEM skills, so science, technology, engineering, maths, and I would also include things like design and creativity and management in that broad category. And so if you look at the way that people have been encouraged in communities to take up STEM before, it has been through science centres. And in Australia, certainly there was a bit of a boom in science centre development in the late 80s. And if I go back to the technology of the time in the 80s, it was pretty much this. And so a lot of the centres that we see were designed at a time when science and technology was seen as an enabler and seen as a way in which we could build a really efficient and effective future. It was seen as a tool to really enable things to happen. I mean, since the 80s, I think things have gotten far muddier. So through the 90s, we were looking at applications of genetically modified foods, for instance, during the noughts, looking at the science of climate change not getting cut through, and the I guess the confusion that erupted through that. And so science, I think, is not as clear as it was when we started. And when, we're starting MOD, this is the technology we're developing. So it's immersive technology that puts you into a different reality. And that got me really thinking about, well, that's what we do as futurists. We immerse people into different realities. We test those realities out, and we question them, we critique them. And so could we build a museum, a science centre, which wasn't around, using technology as a tool, but thinking about technology as a pathway into immersive different realities? And so that's really kind of the way that we've designed the future. And in some ways, thinking about sort of those tensions and those drivers of change around technology, I keep referring back to Suhail Inayatullah's Futures Triangle framework. And so when I'm thinking about what we're trying to do for young adults, it's about helping them understand that push of the present and all of the change and all of the drivers that are happening, as one element of how to help them orientate themselves, and then using this process, if you like, to help them navigate their future. So, one of our key objectives is to help young people navigate uncertain futures. The other thing that we're very conscious about with young adults in particular is it's a time of growth where you're moving out of your identity being defined by your peer group into working out who you are. It's a typical kind of adolescent transformation. And so here I refer back to the work of Cook-Greuter or Rook and Torbert. That's a good HBR article that's quite accessible, where it looks at kind of the worldviews of people. And this data is taken from the Rook and Torbert article. It's very much looking at the percent of US population in management roles and saying what kind of worldview do they have. And most of adult managers are kind of sitting in that expert achiever kind of level, and it's not really until you get to the individualist strategist level that you're better able to cope with systems thinking, for instance, or thinking about holding multiple truths at once. And so when we're talking about a young adult audience, we're talking about really being here in that diplomat expert area. I'm generalizing, and I acknowledge that I'm generalizing, but it really is that time of being defined by your peers and looking for guidelines to living and starting to make sense of your own identity. And if you're at that level of thinking, and yet we're asking you to grapple with AI and automation, and we're asking you to grapple with how to solve climate change, and we're asking you to grapple with how to solve social inequity. Those are really difficult issues. So that's one thing that we're conscious of. But the second one is what we want to do in that diplomat is we want people to feel safe to explore those issues. We want them to feel like people like them are interested in those issues, and that here is a place of belonging. And so that's the second key objective that we bring in. Not only do we want to help young people navigate the future, but we also want to make them feel like they belong with us on that journey. And hence that's the catch cry of how we talk about ourselves. We are a place to be, to belong, and we are a place to be inspired about what the future might hold. And the way that we do that is to bring in those future focused kind of frameworks to underpin some of the work that we are doing. We are very much about provoking new ideas, so that's new future ideas, but often that's really based in the research that happens at our institution, the University of South Australia, but also other universities in Australia and overseas. And we do that by creating exhibitions and experiences that pull together ideas around science, art, and innovation. So as an example, just to give you a kind of an insight into the galleries, one of our first exhibitions, which you can see here, was designed to showcase research from Professor Lorimer Mosley and Dr. Tasha Stanton, who are pain researchers. And Lorimer and Tasha's work shows that people who experience chronic pain, they're not experiencing pain because of an injury or a site of inflammation. They're experiencing pain because the neural pathways in the brain have been trained to expect that stimulus. And so it literally is in the chemistry of the brain that pain is occurring. So we designed this interactive, which allows you to sit in a chair, and then we apply either a heat probe or an electric shock to your hand, enough to make it hurt. And then we play around with games that will give you examples of distraction or focus or changing the color. So in this slide, you can see that Kelly is sitting under a red light, and we found that if you're exposed to the stimulus under a red light, it hurts a lot more than if you're exposed to the stimulus under a blue light. And so our environment changed the way that brain perceives. Now, I think I have just lost my slides, so I'll just try and share them again.
The audio went out just for a tiny bit. Just if you can share the screen again, I just resume everything.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know quite what happened there. I think I just wasn't touching it enough. There we go. So we should be back on now.
Yeah.
Great.
Everything back.
Excellent. So, so yes, that what I've just showed you is those the pain chairs, if you like, we called them. I mean, it had a more serious name called Feeling Human, and there was a whole environment. But what we found was that 70% of our audience members, after being in that room where they were learning about pain, were able to explain that in their own words when they came out, and were able to then articulate some ways in which you might be able to address that or where the research was focused. So quite a powerful mechanism for helping people understand principles. So that's one way in which we do that. But I think the more interesting part when we're relating to foresight specifically is helping young people see the drivers of change that we talk about. So one of the frameworks that I use is 5 ways to think about the future, and one of those ways is to look at the distributed present, which of course comes from the William Gibson quote, which you'll all be familiar with. So this is really around looking what else is happening and trying to bring in that understanding of drivers of change, and to expose our audience to some of the things that we think are likely to change in the future to make it real for them. So some of the drivers of change that we've made visible for people are around thinking about increasing, like, what does post-reconciliation look like between, certainly in Australia, between Australians and First Nations Aboriginal people here. And I think this is a common issue, not just in Australia, but also in Canada and in any country where there is a history of colonisation, of which there are many. And so this is an exhibition that we developed, which shows the 44 different First Nations language groups across our state of South Australia here in Australia. There are over 200 different First Nations language groups. And yet most people aren't aware of the diversity of language. Most people aren't aware of the diversity of culture. So by bringing that into the space and just having some of those words of welcome, so the words are in different languages. Some of those words say things like, how are you? It's nice to welcome you. Would you like a cup of tea? And they're also current and evolving illustrations of a very ongoing culture, sort of something that isn't stuck in a historical context. So helping people see that thinking about decolonisation and thinking about new relationships between First Nations people and the people also in country is really critical and important. And it's nice to see that this exhibition particularly has gone into a permanent place within the university, within one of the libraries, so that it becomes a common kind of perception. The next thing is around climate change. So at the moment we have this exhibition that showcases octopus ecologies and marine ecologies around the coast of South Australia. And by looking at the database of animals just off the coast, and there's amazing footage here. There's footage of sharks fighting and crabs riding sharks, based on some of the research that's happening at Flinders University. Young people are able to see that marine diversity and then ask questions about how the climate is affecting that. And that's, again, a way of bringing in kind of something that feels very tangible to understand how this research is looking at the effects of climate on ocean animals. I'm just going to stand up because I'm in the office and it has gone dark because I am not moving enough. Hopefully that's helped. Another exhibition that we've got on at the moment is an exhibition we've created with engineering students where they worked through the honours project to develop a demonstrator that looks at Industry 4.0. So the thing closest to you can see is a robot arm that is customized, doing customized manufacturing. So the student in the white shirt has just selected a series of choices for what kind of vehicle he wants to manufacture. And then there's a test driving facility which uses a plethora of sensing and camera to feed back to data. And so really giving people that insight into what Industry 4.0 means and what we're actually talking about when we're talking about automation and machine learning. The other driver of change that we're seeing is, technological change towards thinking about mixed realities. So we actually ran an exhibition with Saab. It's a defence company that has a base here in Adelaide, looking at how they'd use the Microsoft HoloLens to design a deployable hospital. And giving young people an insight into what defence work looks like, but also giving people an understanding of what it does mean to be in an augmented reality, as opposed to just a VR headset that they might have been more familiar with, or something through the phone. So to sort of show a range of applications of something that they might have just got a glimpse of. Of course, COVID's the other thing that has hit everybody, stating the obvious. But this image here is from a meeting that we had with a bunch of students who were developing a podcast for us. Usually we'd bring them in and we'd work with a local radio station, Radio Adelaide, to develop the podcasts that we produce. So that was all done online and released online last year. But I think this is interesting because it points to a whole lot of those drivers about the future of work and thinking about remote work, thinking about the type of skill sets it takes to work remotely, and giving, not just our audience, but also the young people that we work with in the space a chance to kind of try out some of those ideas and experience what that might be like. I guess the other result we've seen about COVID is very much about well-being. And looking at kind of the wave of mental ill health that we are seeing through the community. And so one of the things that we've done previously, this is prior to COVID, but we were looking very much at sleep as a tool for well-being, and looking at a range of things that can help with sleep. And we were specifically locating that in the context of shift work, that any student will have those sorts of issues, and really talking about the importance of well-being as one of those drivers of change and one of the focuses of what kind of communities we are wanting or trying to create. Another thing that's been incredibly topical in South Australia as a concern is issues of sexual harassment and assault. And especially in the last 3 months, the Australian of the Year is a high-profile position, and this year it is Grace Tame, who has spoken out about sexual assault and rape. And she's made it very much a conversation and very much a conversation around what it takes to change a culture around some fairly horrific and violent kind of behaviours. A couple of years ago, we ran an exhibition called Fable, which came out of research we were doing to find out what young people needed when it came to thinking about sex and sexual health. And the two things they needed, which they weren't getting through their school education, were concepts around consent and concepts around pleasure. So we ran a theatre show which was all about self-pleasure, and we ran this exhibition which was all about consent, sort of set in an alien spaceship where you are trying to make relationships to help fix things, but if you don't do it without consent, you basically fail the game. And that visceral experience of not making a good friendship was the starting point for many discussions about consent as part of that exhibition. Finally, in the drivers, I just wanted to also mention a short film that we made with Superflux, who many of you will know, UK-based design foresight firm. Superflux made a film for us called Trigger Warning. We made it at the end of 2017, and it was looking at the increasing tribal identities that we were getting through the internet. So lack of trust in institutions, the rise of fake news, cults, increasing fragmentation, shallow discourse. So just thinking about those sorts of things, which have kind of, I guess, gotten worse and maybe better recently, but certainly gotten worse since we did it. And again, helping young people think about the trajectory of the kind of environments they're in, and think about the importance of critical media literacies and the role of journalism in democracy. So in a few short exhibitions, if you like, a few short years, we've managed to cover a lot of those drivers and really made them visible and tangible for young people so that they can see them. And as I said, in some cases, working with young people to deliver those. So either through the engagement in the delivery of the podcast, or actually students working in the delivery of exhibitions themselves, or with design advisory groups. So people coming in to help us think about, to do some user testing on some of the things that we've done, or to help us think about some particular aspects of the exhibitions that we're doing. And for me, those drivers of change and the way that we've done is all about generating possibility. It's all about getting people to take a driver and then imagine what might come out of that. And I think that's especially true for the experiences with the augmented reality and the trigger warning film about the internet. Those prompted conversations. So we have casual staff on our floor who are conversing with visitors all the time, and those sorts of things prompted conversations about what might be possible. So I've always got the futures cone in the back of my head, and what we're trying to do at MOD is kind of cover a lot of those possibilities. I mean, I think the consent app, though it had exhibition, though it had a kind of a serious intent, was clearly a preposterous kind of space sort of future that was a bit odd and a bit fantastical. Trigger warning feels very plausible, even though we were trying to not make it predictable. It sort of has fallen back into that realm. And thinking about the conversations that might come out about climate change, or that might come out about some of those other drivers, are certainly fitting within those plausible realms. And that's kind of where we're helping young people situate themselves, not thinking about a predictable future, but looking at where the research is going and asking questions about what might happen out of that. And of course, out of all of that, we still want to get to this preferable future. So when I said, we're helping young people navigate the future, it's not to leave them kind of hanging. The experience in the exhibition, should be a whole range of different experiences and emotions, but we want them to leave those doors feeling like they have some kind of agency, some kind of capability to navigate the future, and some clear idea about what they want. At the most basic level, it might be they want to do some more thinking about something, or they might have changed their career ideas about something, or they might be really passionate about something that they've seen that they want to actually take up. What kind of futures might you create? And we've sort of seen the impact on people in various ways. So one of our 16-year-olds came in and saw an exhibition we've done looking at genetic modification of people, and chose to do her Year 12 research project on that. We had another artist come in inspired by some augmented reality, and she chose to do a show with another couple of young people who were building her an app to make that happen. And so we can kind of see that tangible effect of how people have interacted and what they do out of it. And these are small futures, I would say, that they're immediate kind of actions that they take. But what we're trying to build up towards is that this series of experiences will help people start to really question that dynamic between the future that's coming towards them in a rush and seems very confusing, all of those different drivers, and the future that they're able to think about, that they're able to identify, and then work in steps to create for themselves, and to be flexible and resilient enough to be able to cope with that uncertainty. So that's very much moving into that envisaged futures space and how we help young people create them. And I know Marie just talked about Schneider's theory, and I really like a couple of articles that Rowena Morrow's written on this as well. So what we're trying to do when people come in is encourage hope. So happy to make them feel icky, but we do want them to feel hopeful when they leave. And so it's about, bringing some visions forward, giving them ways to think about how they can get there through pathways, and making them feel like when they go, anything's possible. And we're certainly seeing that in the response to the student engineering project on Industry 4.0. If a student can do that, maybe there's something I can do, which I think is really positive. And a couple of other examples of that. In Australia, at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we had horrific bushfires across a lot of the country, and in South Australia, particularly on Kangaroo Island in January. And at the time, we were displaying an exhibition called Seven Siblings from the Future, which we'd adapted from the Heureka Science Centre exhibition in Finland. And the end point of that exhibition was to ask people, what kind of future do you want to create? What do you want to do to make towards a better future, to really kind of, again, make that agency and positive vision really clear for people. And there was a lot that had come up previously, but after the bushfires, it was a wall of red, like these beautiful pictures that I have in front of me, of really about what actions people would take to try and control climate change, or to try and improve, disaster relief, or to try and think about climate change in the future. And I think that's really a really powerful symbol of how immersing yourself in a future world. For 7 siblings, it was immersing them in 2050, and then giving them that kind of response to be able to take out. Another example is a game that we designed, which was called Symbiosville, and it was all around gut bacteria. But in the game mechanics itself, young people were getting, tips and tricks for how they might actually improve gut bacteria and understand the link between healthy gut and well-being, and good mental health. Again, critical. So giving people some tools to actually affect change in their own personal lives as well. The final way of kind of bringing in futures tools, if you like, is to look at emergent futures, which of course comes from the work from Theory U and Otto Scharmer, and leading from the future as it emerges. And I mentioned, I said we are navigating the future with young people. We are creating things with and for them, but input into what we are doing is critical. And so in April 2019, we actually ran an open space session with a bunch of our stakeholders, so a range of people. So we had everybody from 15-year-olds through to festival directors and professors, to talk to us about what they wanted to talk about when it came to talking about the future, and what kind of conversations kept them up at 2 a.m. The answer to that second question was mostly Uber Eats, but the answer to the first question was really interesting, and a whole lot of issues came out looking at social justice and data privacy, and thinking about fake news, and thinking about the future of education. All of these notes were written up, and in typical open space style, that's kind of the links that happen between all of those groups. So conversations they designed themselves and run themselves. My favorite moment was watching a year 12 girl lead a conversation on the future of food with a professor from the University of Adelaide and the director of the Adelaide Festival. And so being able to have those empowered conversations about what sort of future conversations they wanted to have, I think was really important for us. But the exciting thing out of that is that's what's helped us develop our new exhibition themes. So next year, the first of those themes will be in our exhibition. The theme is invisibility, and it comes directly from what you're looking at, the conversations on that wall, merging together issues around climate and data privacy, data transparency, tracking, ubiquitous sensing, and issues of social justice, and making making links visible, especially when it comes to First Nations experiences and First Nations stories. So it's going to be a really, really interesting exhibition. But I'm so excited that it's come out of those conversations that we've had with and for our audience. So in summary, we've got a really wonderful platform in the fact that we've got a museum that sits in the centre of a university, that sits in the centre of a community which is actively interested in futures ideas. And using those exhibitions and experiences to tell stories of research, but also to underpin them with future frameworks, so that we know that we are having hopefully the best effect on that young adult audience to, as I said, to feel like they belong, and to feel like they're capable of being in this world which is uncertain and a bit messy, and to give them some tools in which they can navigate it. So that's us at MOD, and how we're working with and for young people to navigate futures.
Hello, Kristin. Welcome back. Well, welcome back to myself, because you were already there. So everyone is just if you can see the comments on the right side of your screen. Everyone is just telling how amazing it is to work with young people and educating them through gaming.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really exciting things that we've done there. So I think the Fable app or the fable experience of creating a game where you're coming in and interacting with an alien and in the process learning about the 5 guidelines for healthy sexual consent is a real sort of classic way of engaging with people. But we do like to bring in, like when we're thinking about young people, we've thought about the types of people and why they might come. And as I said, I showed you that first image, which was of the VR headset as the kind of the key tech space. And so a lot of our thinking has emerged from thinking about gaming personas instead of museum personas. And so thinking about the achiever persona for us is about someone who wants to come in and wants to win at something, wants to kind of achieve something or see. So at the moment we've got a game which is all about how CAR T cell therapies work for cancer treatment and what the research of that looks like. And it's very much a game where you need to sort of get in there and work out the trick to change the T cell structure to be able to kill cancer cells, for instance. So thinking about those types of games as part of our interactives is really good, because it engages different, it motivates and engages different types of people.
We have one question over here from Martin asking 5 ways to talk about the future. What was your structuring or source of inspiration? Yeah,
so that comes from I finished my master's at Swinburne in 2008, and since then, before coming to MOD, lots of futures work with community organisations, with state governments, with local councils, and that's been my kind of experience, that there are 5 different ways to think about the future, and cheekily I'll say most people use one, which is to take their past experience and extrapolate it. And, I do hear a lot of futurists say, oh, we don't do predictions, that's not what futures is all about. And my response to that is, well, actually, that's important. It's just not sufficient. And so giving people that grounding to say, yes, using your past experience and thinking about the extrapolation of that is important, but it's not sufficient, because we don't actually do that very well to start with, because I think, as Marie's shown in the integral mapping, we tend to just prioritize one sort of quadrant, really. So helping them map out past futures, then helping them expand to those distributive futures, then kind of moving forward, playing with possibility, being fun, being preposterous, and then kind of going, okay, out of that, and being able to hold the possibility for a bit longer before you shrink to the preferred and the strategic action, and then helping people really think about, that's not it. We also want to be emergent. We also want to be listening and picking up things as we go. So I found that to be that's how I structure my futures workshops now, because it allows me to introduce a number of frameworks along the way. People will pick up a framework that they really like to work with, but it sort of expands the vocabulary for futures thinking for them.
That is great. We have another question here, a few of them. So I'm going to choose this one from Haya. Saying, how do you communicate the view of the young generation to change or reshape the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, the conversations that we have with our audience kind of get fed into our own design of stuff, for sure. It's interesting because I think we haven't done that particularly well to, if you've got an audience coming in, they're somewhat ephemeral. They come in and you might not sort of see them again. But one of the things that we've just started doing with the university is an ethics community of practice. And part of that ethics community of practice is to bring our audience and our researchers together to have discussions about emerging research and technological issues. Like we just explored issues related to the iPhone, which raised all sorts of things from, the use of materials to modern slavery. And then we're looking at how we feed back to that ethical question, how their input has then informed exhibitions or experiences that we design for other people. So there is that loop of feeding things back. And we also publish, some blogs and some other sort of articles that kind of allude to how we might have brought some of those those bits of feedback in. But yeah, it is a challenge because anybody with teenagers or working with teenagers will tell you that they're busy and they've got other things, and so being able to really we're just trying to do a really brief touch point and make sure that generally they know that their views are valued.
So we have another question from Alisa. Right? Wait, it moved here. Okay, so we have this one here. You see it on screen. How you are including more people is who else is engaged in these type of things? Not only the youth, I guess. Someone else.
Yes, I mean, we do run a variety of school visits, and a lot of our school visits will be in that slightly younger category, probably 13, 14-year-olds, whereas we generally see the 15 to 25-year-olds sort of come in, in their own sort of social groups, and that's what we're really aiming for. So we do work with teachers. We've got a program where we're working with teachers to deliver we'll show them through and we'll give them tours, but we've also got a full day workshop where we'll be and that's quite science orientated, more so than futures orientated. But it also depends a little bit on the exhibition. We get a lot of young families and grandparents coming through. We get a lot of professionals coming through. I had a group from our water corporation, SA Water, come through as a leadership group recently to see the complex systems exhibition that we've currently got running. So it is quite varied. We are a little bit constrained post-COVID, but we had probably 85,000 people through in 2019. And so, we are getting to a good proportion of the community coming in and interacting with what we're doing. And even last year when we were closed for 6 months of the year, we still managed to reach nearly 50,000 people in the galleries and another 20,000 people through our online exhibition. So that allows us to reach other sort of populations. And I guess, the other thing that you probably will have noticed from the photos that I showed is that we're quite conscious on making sure that people from diverse backgrounds feel like they belong. So making sure that our exhibitions are accessible for people who might have hearing or vision or mobility access needs, making sure that young Aboriginal people feel like there is a space for them and there is recognition of their culture and that's visible and tangible for them. Making sure, we get, again, prior to COVID, a lot of international students. So again, making sure that, and a lot of our volunteers were international students. So making sure, again, that people from where English isn't a first language can come into a space and feel like they belong in the city are all really important things to the life of Adelaide. But also, as again, not just Marie, but a couple of people in this session last night, we're also talking about those need for diverse voices. So I keep sort of thinking if we can make a space that is welcoming to a diverse range of people and we're giving them some tools for futures, then that's a seed for something that I don't know what it quite is yet, but at least it's a start.
Yeah, and you related this to the COVID and the pandemic and how it was a little bit more difficult. And we have Sally here asking that every uni needs someone like you and a mod, but just because of the pandemic, finances are being challenged for universities. Are you being challenged to justify your existence or relevance to the core university business?
Yeah, absolutely, Sally. That's a very pointed question that gets to my heart a bit. I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school, but we're not seen as critical to teaching and learning, and I think that's fair enough in the kind of context that we're in and the pressures that universities are facing. So this year we're running on about 30% of the budget we may have previously, and we've coped with that by reducing our opening hours and extending the exhibition timeframes and by pausing marketing and programs and things like that, with the hope that we'll be able to then come back up and grow. And I think to some extent that's a reasonable response. But I guess the more pressing one is why aren't we critical to teaching and learning, and how do we get to be critical to teaching and learning? So some of the longer term future things that we've started to seed are around we're just putting forward a PhD project looking at how museums might design around data visualization, for instance, where we become a core part of that, and we're looking at how we might structure some online short courses for students around foresight and systems thinking, because we have kind of that expertise, and because we think that students, that those capabilities are critical. So I think yes, we are being challenged. We have been challenged, and the key strategic thing is to make sure that we are actually core university business, because of the impact we have for future students, for current students, for researchers, and for the general community. So that's that's my big challenge to work on over the next couple of years.
Indeed, that is the second question for Sally, is how are you measuring the impact of the work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we do visitor surveys, so we know what people think about the exhibition, whether they're enjoying it, whether they'd recommend it. We do impact surveys on the particular exhibits that might showcase research, to seeing if we're having that input. We will look at kind of uptake on student enrollments to see if people who've been interested in mod are taking action towards further study. All of these are a bit hard to kind of really land, though, I think, in terms of that. And I'm taken by the argument that, sometimes what I used to have a PhD supervisor who said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I'm on the emergent future part of that, which is to say some of these things aren't really helpfully measured at all. What we've got to do is trust the purpose and the process, and iterate and be wise to the emergence. And so I keep thinking what we're doing, and when I first set up MOD, I set up 2 100-year futures, and one of those was to be a key turning point for young people in the way that they made sense of their lives, and the other one was to contribute to Adelaide as a centre of learning. We're on Kaurna land here in Adelaide, lands of the Kaurna people, and it has always been a place for learning. 60,000 years worth of kind of the place where people came to learn and to share. So I kind of keep that purpose in the back of my head about long-term impact, and keep the short-term impacts on the, are people coming through? Are they enjoying themselves? Are they learning? Are they taking action? What kind of impact are we having on them? But Sally's asking really hard questions.
Yeah, so that is always when we talk about the futures and the impact of our actions today, that is probably the hardest one to answer. Is that it's very difficult to measure. We are talking about the very long term, but measuring what is happening today is easier than what is going to happen in 20 years or 10 or 5. So it's very, very difficult to measure. But however, it was a really, really excellent presentation on how to approach the youth at the moment that they are actually eager to eat all that information and change behavior. So thank you so much, Kristin. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to see your work again. And we hope that you enjoyed the session. And we see you in the chat in every session. So we know that you are following a lot of the talks, and it might be already late for you, given that you are in Australia. But thank you so much again. And
thank you,
everyone else. Just stay on the website. We come back in about 3 to 4 minutes with Sora in a new session in the Global Foresight Summit. Thank you so much.